I come to the floor today to speak to one of the most significant issues facing the security of our nation. It is a question of domestic terrorism, specifically the threat of violent white supremacists. In Tuesday's presidential debate, moderator Chris Wallace asked President Donald Trump to condemn white supremacists and right-wing militia. President Trump refused. Instead, he replied, and I quote, "Proud Boys stand back and stand by," end of quote. The Proud Boys, a far-right group that promotes and engages in violence, viewed President Trump's words as a call to action. The group's leader, Joe Biggs, said he took the president's words as a directive to, quote, "F them up," close quote. I was appalled but not surprised by the president's words. He has a long history of inflammatory racist remarks. Now, President Trump claims that violence is a left-wing problem, not a right-wing problem, his words. Let me be clear. I join Vice President Biden in condemning all violence, but we know that white supremacists pose a great threat. An unclassified May 2017 FBI DHS Joint Intelligence Bulletin found that, quote, "White supremacist extremism poses a persistent threat of lethal violence," end of quote. This was a finding by the lead law enforcement agencies of the Trump administration. They went on to say that white supremacists were responsible for more homicides from 2000 to 2016 than any other domestic extremist movement. The director of the FBI, Mr. Wray, in response to a question I posed in the Senate Judiciary Committee last year, said that the majority of domestic terrorism arrests involved white supremacists. Now, for years, I've urged the Trump administration to respond to the ongoing threat of violent white supremacists and other far right-wing extremists. Instead, they have repeatedly downplayed this very lethal and real threat. Attorney General Barr has never responded to the multiple letters I've sent asking what the Department of Justice was doing to combat white supremacist violence. Unfortunately, as we've learned from former Trump administration officials themselves, the Trump administration has downplayed the threat of violent white supremacists. Politico recently reported that a draft Homeland Threat Assessment report from DHS was edited to weaken language on the threat posed by violent white supremacists. And a DHS whistleblower alleged that DHS officials, including Ken Cuccinelli, requested the modification of the report to make the threat of white supremacists, quote, "appear less severe," and add information on violent left-wing groups. It's not enough to just stand here and condemn the president's remarks at the infamous debate. The American people sent us to Congress to act. There is something we can do now. There is something that we can do that will show we are prepared to respond to this threat to law and order, to this threat of violent white supremacists. I'm the lead sponsor of the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act, bipartisan legislation that would address the threat of violent white supremacists and other domestic terrorists. Our bill would establish offices to combat domestic terrorism at the Department of Justice, FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security. It would require these offices to regularly assess the domestic terrorism threat and focus their limited resources on the most significant threats. Critically, they would provide training and resources to assist state, local, tribal law enforcement in addressing domestic terrorism threat. The House companion of my bill was introduced by my colleague and friend, Congressman Brad Schneider of Illinois. Just last week, the House of Representatives passed our bill on a unanimous voice vote. The Senate should pass it today. In a few moments, the staff will provide me with the language to ask for a unanimous consent. I'm waiting so that there's an opportunity for both sides to discuss the procedure moving forward. In the meantime, several of my colleagues have asked to come to the floor and address the issue. I would yield to them for a comment or question through the chair with the hopes that when the procedural language arrives that I might be able to make the unanimous consent request.
Mr. President, Madam President.
The senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Madam President. We are here today on probably one of the most serious national security issues that we will confront. And I say that as a member of the Armed Services Committee, having received a variety of classified briefings on threats to this country, some of them regarding ongoing foreign interference in our election are truly chilling. But the threat to our national security from white supremacists now operating so openly that the director of the FBI has said they are one of the paramount threats, an ongoing security threat to our nation, demands action. It should be action now. The bill that my colleague, Senator Durbin, is offering passed unanimously by the House of Representatives within recent days. Let me repeat, passed unanimously by the House of Representatives, reflects the real and urgent danger of this threat. The President has refused to denounce white supremacy. The President has told one of the most prominent of those groups to stand by. That failure, an abject failure on the part of the Commander-in-Chief to respond to an ongoing security threat, demands this action now. We must stand up for the integrity of our elections, the security of our nation, and the fundamental freedoms that we prize as American people. We will not allow this cancer to metastasize in this country and thwart the will of Americans who are going to the polls. In effect, right now, ballots are being cast. The threat to our electoral will is ongoing. And so I am proud to join my colleagues who are here on the floor. We represent an ideological spectrum, as did the House of Representatives in unanimously approving this bill. The paramount threat to our nation and the integrity of our elections is white supremacy, violent extremism, nationalism that potentially jeopardizes the very pillars of our democracy. I yield the floor. Thank you.
Senator from Virginia.
Madam President.
The senator from Virginia.
Madam President, I rise to support the efforts of my colleagues to bring the unanimous House bill establishing legal procedures for dealing with white supremacy to the floor of the Senate. And I do so in honor of 4 Virginians. In August of 2017, a group called Unite the Right held a white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. They started on a Friday evening when Jewish residents of Charlottesville were gathering in synagogues and when students were coming to University of Virginia to start their academic careers. And they rampaged through the campus and community chanting slogans from Nazi rallies like "Jews will not replace us" or "Blood and Soil." As if that was not terrorizing enough, on the next day, they escalated physical attacks against many. Heather Heyer was a Charlottesville resident and paralegal with an amazing background and story who was peacefully protesting that day and a white supremacist from another state revved his car up, hit her, and killed her. DeAndre Harris was a special education instructional aide in Charlottesville, and he was set upon by a number of white supremacists and beaten with objects severely. Two Virginia state troopers, Jay Cullen and Burke Bates, both of whom I knew. Jay Cullen often flew me in a helicopter when I was governor, and I met Burke Bates, the trooper, because he was part of Governor McAuliffe's security detail. They were called out on that day, which would have been a day off, but they were called out on that day because they needed to provide extra security as this white supremacist rally ran amok in Charlottesville. And on that day, both of them lost their lives as their helicopter malfunctioned. And so I stand on the floor of the Senate thinking of these four Virginians, two of whom I knew, three of whom lost their lives and one who was injured severely in this Unite the Right rally, to say that it's time that we have laws in this country that would enable us to appropriately deal with the chief source of domestic terrorism. And for that, I thank my colleague and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Alabama.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator Durbin, for this bill. Thank you for the colleagues that are on here. You know, I was struck when Senator King rose in honor of those who died in Virginia. The list goes on and on. You can go to Emmett Till, you can go to the four girls, you know, Addie Mae Collins and Carol Robertson and Denise McNair and Cynthia Wesley. You can go to those that lost their lives in a church in Charleston, South Carolina. And the thing that connects them all is just not that they died because of the color of their skin, not just because of the white supremacists that were trying to change the political dynamic in this country. It's an unbroken string that goes back decades and generations. It goes back to the time of the great original sin of slavery, when white supremacy tried to dominate this country, and it goes back to a string of unbroken deaths that are occurring even as we speak. Hate crimes across this country have proliferated. And whether it's not just white on black, it's the Tree of Life Synagogue. It is so many things that we have to stop. And the interesting thing to me that what happened this week is that the day after the presidential debates, when the President of the United States refused to condemn white supremacy, the governor of the state of Alabama, my friend Kay Ivey, Republican governor of the state of Alabama, apologized to the victims of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing that occurred 57 years ago, an implicit acknowledgement that words matter, that statements of public officials have an effect on people. They give a green light to violence, often unintended. So this bill that Senator Durbin has proposed, that has passed, as Senator Blumenthal and others have said unanimously, is a statement that we cannot allow this to continue. It is a statement that we will, as law enforcement, as citizens and people in a free country, will put an end to this kind of rhetoric and this kind of hate. We cannot let this moment pass, folks, in this body. The House passed this bill unanimously, so should the United States Senate. We should make a stand with our colleagues in the House, Republican and Democrat, that this is an important statement right now, because what is unsaid so much right now is that we see this playing out in this country. We see it playing out in the streets. And we can talk about it from the right or the left, and we can talk about it from Republicans or Democrats, but the fact is we need to be talking about it in terms of people and victims, innocent victims. That's what this bill is about, protecting the lives of all Americans, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their religion, regardless of their political persuasion. This bill will do that. Give the FBI the tools necessary. Give the statement from the United States Senate that we will not stand for this. Support this bill. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
President,
Senator from New Jersey.
I'm really grateful, Madam President. It has been said, and it is quite true, the only thing necessary for evil to be triumphant is for good people to do nothing. And here we are at a time where we know our history. Since 9/11, the greatest terrorism we've seen in our country, actions from a church in South Carolina to a synagogue in Pittsburgh to a Walmart in El Paso, time and time again, the violence that we have seen, the greatest terrorist activity since 9/11 has been domestic terrorism, right-wing extremists, the majority of them white supremacists. The warnings that we are now getting from our intelligence officials, I quoted one in Judiciary Committee hearing from the Department of Homeland Security, the most significant threat right now for the security of our country is white supremacy and violent white supremacy. The FBI has now given a number of warnings. We now are heading towards an election where we are seeing signs of increased activity, increased hate, increased focus. This body, this good body, friends on both sides of the aisle, this is not a time where we can do nothing. We must act. We must take measures and steps to end this kind of violent scourge in our country. Obviously, this will not accomplish everything, but in a time like this, we must do something. I join my colleagues in support of this legislation, and I want to again affirm the fact, quite encouraging, that it passed in a bipartisan manner in the United States House of Representatives. That is so encouraging. We should do the same here. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
Assistant Democratic Leader.
Madam President, first I ask unanimous consent that Senator Manchin's name be added as a co-sponsor to S3190.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam President, we're asking for unanimous consent to pass a bill that has passed the House of Representatives unanimously, by a voice vote, unanimously, to empower and direct the law enforcement agencies of the United States to use their talents and resources to stop domestic terrorism, to stop the killing. We are identifying in the course of it the white supremacy and far-right extremism as one of the sources. Listen to what a Trump administration Department of Justice official wrote last year in the New York Times. Quote, "White supremacy and far-right extremism are among the greatest domestic security threats facing the United States. Regrettably, over the past 25 years, law enforcement at both federal and state levels have been slow to respond. Killings committed by individuals and groups associated with far-right extremist groups have risen significantly. We are not manufacturing a crisis. The Trump administration Department of Justice official concurs with our actions that they are needed." How did I get involved in this? It goes back to 2012. As chairman of a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee, I held a hearing on the threat of violent right-wing extremism after a white supremacist murdered 6 worshipers at a Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Officials from the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and FBI, even at that time, testified about the threat posed by violent domestic extremists. When President Trump was asked and challenged to condemn this violence, he refused. The question is whether the United States Senate, now given the same opportunity, will stand as the House of Representatives has on a unanimous bipartisan basis to say enough when it comes to domestic terrorism inspired by white supremacy and right-wing extremists. And let me add, there is nothing in this bill to stop the efforts of those same agencies to police and stop left-wing extremism, all extremism. I have no problems condemning all of it, but we're focusing on the one that is the most significant in the words of the Department of Justice. And so, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 5602 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Madam President,
The senator from Wisconsin.
reserving the right to object. Madam President, I just found out about this bill a couple hours ago. I've been busy, haven't really been able to really research it. And that's part of the problem with what our Democrat colleagues are trying to do here is just quick rush through the United States Senate. Now, maybe this has had a full vetting in the House of Representatives, but here in the United States Senate, it hasn't gone through any committee process whatever. Now, unfortunately, I also have to make the point, because I'm sure they're trying to make a political point as opposed to trying to make law today. I have to make the point that I am opposed to all forms of domestic terrorism, including white supremacists. I think I speak for all my Republican colleagues. I think I speak for every United States senator. We all abhor domestic violence and terror, including white supremacists. But the fact of the matter is, and again, I don't have much knowledge about this, even though I'm chairman of the Committee of Jurisdiction of one of the departments that would be subject to this piece of legislation. I know that department was not consulted on this piece of legislation. I've been given notice here that the Department of Justice does not support this piece of legislation because they say it would seriously impede their ability to work in the domestic terrorism space. So again, I'm not exactly sure why the Department of Justice does not like this piece of legislation, but suffice to say they don't. The Department of Homeland Security was not even consulted on this. As chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, I don't know anything about this bill. This is not the way to pass a serious piece of legislation dealing with this serious issue. Now, if it is a good piece of legislation, the sponsor should have no problem running it through the normal committee jurisdiction process. In this case, apparently this is Judiciary Committee. But I would think my committee would also have some pretty strong equities in this space, not to mention the fact that I've been working with my ranking member on precisely these types of issues. So instead of just trying to make a political point, what I've always tried to do is actually get a result and make law, but that has to go through a thoughtful process using the full committee process, which has not been the case here. So, Madam President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President,
Yes.
yes, I'm trying to make a political point. And it should be a bipartisan political point. It should be Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, as there was a unanimous voice vote in the House of Representatives on the same measure. I'm sorry my colleague from Wisconsin has left. The Senate version of this bill has been pending for 9 months. For 9 months. The House has moved their version of it. It is a timely issue. Why waste a day in making America safer? Why not tell our law enforcement agencies now, roll up your sleeves, go to work, find the most dangerous things happening in this country and stop them? And we know one of them is white supremacists and their right-wing extremism. The president fumbled and couldn't come up with an answer 2 days ago. Today, sadly, from the Republican side, we get an objection to coming together on a bipartisan basis, as they did in the House, to address this very real issue. I am troubled by this. It is a sad moment. I do believe the senator from Wisconsin and many others will say that they are against extremism. They had a chance to prove it by passing a measure here and refused. I yield the floor.